Welcome back to another episode of DMV Hoops Weekly here on the Department of Hoops YouTube channel. I'm your host, Mason Kinnahan. It was a little bit of a calmer week this week for the DMV's teams after a full slate of Feast Week festivities the week prior. However, conference play did begin for the Maryland Terrapins, who took on Iowa on Saturday. But before we get into that game at Iowa, let's talk about Maryland's game against Wagner earlier in the week. The Terps were coming off of you could say, a disappointing performance in the Players Era Festival, but they were able to bounce back against Wagner and pick up the win 89-63 against the Seahawks. It was a dominant win from Maryland from start to finish. Pharrell Payne led the way with 30 points. He had 10 boards as well, 14 of 20 from the charity stripe for him. Miles Rice had 16 points. Darius Adams added 12. And Solomon Washington, who got his first start for the Terrapins this season, had 10 points and 6 rebounds for Maryland. So a very impressive performance for the Terps and able to pick up a 20-plus point win over Wagner and improved to 6-3 on the season. Then they played Iowa at Iowa to kick off Big Ten play on Saturday. In this one, Maryland was outmatched in this one. 83-64 was the final score. It was 44-30 at halftime. The struggles from beyond the arc continue for the Terrapins. 30% from the field in this one, 6 of 20, and then in the game against Wagner as well, 5 of 20 from beyond the arc. So a pretty not so good performance from beyond the arc. But Pharrell Payne had 17 points and 14 boards. He had added 2 assists as well for Maryland. Additionally, off the bench is kind of where the big factors came in with Andre Mills and David Coy. Both of them were in double digits, but shooting the ball was not that efficient for Maryland. Only 36% from the field. And you look at Iowa, who shot over 50% from the field and over 40% from three. No match against Maryland. No match for Maryland in this one. And also the Terps, 18 turnovers is not going to help win you a game. Maryland only has one game this week, which will be a home matchup against Michigan next Saturday. That'll be a very tough one as the Wolverines come to town against this team in College Park. Let's now move on to Georgetown, who only had one game this past week. It was a 90-81 victory over the UMBC Retrievers. Georgetown was coming off of a couple of losses down in Florida against Dayton and Miami, their first 2 losses of the season, but they were able to pick up the 90-81 victory over UMBC, including having all of their starters score in double digits. Malik Mack had 15, KJ Lewis with 17, Caleb Williams with 18. A great shooting night all around for Georgetown as well. 56% from the field, 48% from beyond the arc, 25 assists. The ball was moving around the entire night for Georgetown. Very, very impressive performance. Here was Ed Cooley's thoughts after the game.
Okay, wait where you start. I thought we played for about 32 minutes, and the one thing I do want to say about Coach Ferry's team, I thought he did the right thing with his scheduling Maryland, going to Dayton. I thought he did a really good job. Those 2 games in particular, won some games at the buzzer. We prepped our men on their, just on their style of play, which is totally different than we're going to play in the Big East. We're coming off of 2, what I thought was 2 very disappointing losses in Orlando to 2 very good teams, possibly 2 tournament teams. Our sense of urgency out the gate in Orlando wasn't what we wanted, but I thought we responded today. I thought we defended well early. I thought we defended well to come out of the second half. And then the last 7 minutes, we've had a trend in these games here where we're not finishing the game, so I was disappointed with that.
Georgetown now has a big game against UNC later today, and then they take on St. Peter's later this week. Let's now go to George Washington, where Chris Caputo's team is 8-2 to begin this season. After picking up 2 losses last week in their Feast Week tournament, they picked up 2 wins this week against Army and against William & Mary. In their game against Army, it was an 84-70 victory, a game they pretty much dominated from start to finish. They were up at halftime. You look at the box score, Rafael Castro led the way with 16 points. Christian Jones and Garrett Johnson each had 14 apiece. The Revolutionaries didn't shoot the ball incredibly well, but they had 40 rebounds and out-rebounded Army 40-25, and that was the big difference in this one. And then you go to the game against William & Mary on Saturday, a 99-86 victory. The offense was humming once more for George Washington, 53% from the field, only shooting 22% from downtown, but it was also at the free throw line where they got a lot of damage done, 19-24 from the charity stripe. Rafael Castro had 18 points, Tyrone Marshall off the bench at 15, but it was Jean-Aaron Gorin who had 20 points off the bench, along with 5 assists as well, 6 of 10 from the field. and 2 of 3 from beyond the arc for Aaron Gordon. So a very impressive performance from the depth of George Washington this week for the Revolutionaries. Here was Chris Caputo's thoughts following the big-time win against William and Mary.
Yeah, it's just a hell of a win for us. This was the highest rated non-conference home opponent since I came here as an assistant in 2017 with the University of Miami, and we had like a top 15 team, 4 NBA players in the game. We had 3, and GW had Yuta Watanabe. So great win for us. Really impressed with Cornell. William Mary, he was at Cornell. I was impressed with him at Cornell. I was impressed learning more about them when we had Sean Hansen here. And I'm extremely impressed in what they're doing now. Thought it was a very, very difficult game. Excellent game for us. I think we've really challenged ourselves with the schedule. When you think about of the 8-2 of the 10 games we've played, first of all, 5 of them, 4 or 5? Yeah, 5 have been away from home. We got 1 more away from home against a pretty good team, obviously.
George Washington now takes on Delaware and Florida in this upcoming week. Let's now move to American, who had a big-time win against Drexel earlier last week. It was a 75-73 comeback victory for the Eagles and Dwayne Simpkins' team. The Eagles were down by 13 points at halftime, down 40-27, but American was able to fight back, put up a 48-33 second half performance. Madden Collins led the way with 19 points, 6 of 15 from the field. And you look at Matt Mayock, who had 15, Greg Jones had 11, and Jeff Sprouse as well with 11. It was an all-around effort for American to come back in this one and pick up the win against the Drexel team that American came in as favorites. So the Eagles are now 6-4 after the win against Drexel, and then they took on Maryland Eastern Shore on Saturday. American picked up another win in this one, a pretty easier win this time around. A 12-point lead at halftime turned into an 18-point 78-60 victory. Drulin Iturbe with 13 points. Matt Mayock had 12. And Dean Hogans with 14 points off the bench for the Eagles. In this one, American shot 48% from 3, 14 of 29 from beyond the arc. Also, you had 28 rebounds to 24, so they won the rebounding battle as well. Another impressive performance from American, who is now 7-4 on the young season. American now doesn't play another game until December 18th when they take on VCU at VCU. Let's now go to George Mason, who were the DMV's last undefeated team heading into the week. They had games against Cornell and Virginia Tech on Saturday. Starting with the game against Cornell earlier in the week, it was a 99-81 victory over the Big Red. It was only a 2-point lead at halftime, but the offense exploded for the Patriots in the second half, including Corey Mincy, who had 16 points, Malik Presley with 17, Jahari Long had 16, 3 players on George Mason's bench in double digits as well. The Patriots shot 56% from the field and 50% from downtown, including shooting 21 from 25, efficient 21 of 25 from the charity stripe. But then they traveled to Blacksburg to take on the Hokies at Virginia Tech. In this one, George Mason went down early in the first half. It was a 43-30 game at halftime. And even though George Mason was able to outscore the Hokies in the second half, they lost their first game of the year, 73-62. The shooting and the decision-making overall from the guards could definitely have been better for George Mason. Corey Mincy, 16 points. Jahari Long with 10 in this one. Riley Allenspach had 11, but those were the only 3 players in double digits for the Patriots. 40% from the field for George Mason, 33% from downtown. Definitely, Tony Skinn was definitely hoping for a better shooting performance from George Mason. George Mason doesn't play until next Saturday when they take on ODU at home. But let's go to the final team here on this week's episode of DMV Hoops Weekly, and that is the Howard Bison, who took on Bowie State, where Howard was able to pick up an 85-69 win over the Bulldogs. In this one, 4 of the 5 starters were in double figures for the Bison. Osei Okoji led the way with 17 points on an efficient of 7 of 10 from the field. Bryce Harris with 15 points, but once more, shooting struggles for him, 4 of 12 from the field and 0 of 5 from deep in this one. But that'll wrap things up here on this week's episode of DMV Hoops Weekly. I've been your host, Mason Kinnahan. It was another busy week of DMV Hoops action, but hopefully we can find some more success for these DMV teams in this upcoming week. But that'll wrap it up here on this week's edition of DMV Hoops Weekly. I've been your host, Mason Kinnahan, signing off.